Welcome everybody. My name is Frank-Ulrich Fricke. I have the pleasure, or it's I need to introduce, and as you have seen, we want to discuss key performance indicators, and we have heard a lot of different, I would say, different positions here. And to me, being an economist, when it comes to key performance indicators, my immediate questions would be how to operationalize, what can we count, when to measure, who should contribute with regard to the figures, the data. And now, having seen what you presented, this is basically a very heterogeneous approach. So I would, I think that's okay, Ruben, yeah? Okay. Then I simply would like to start with giving you the opportunity, at least those of you who did not present their ideas on the KPIs, to kick that off. And then we enter the discussion with all of you, of course, because you heard already my, let's say, desperation on how to operationalize, how to get that into figures, and hence, I need your help. Okay. Oh, you have a, yes, of course.
Okay, so thank you. So, as suggested, I identified some KPIs. I tried to rank them. It was not so easy. So let me just to anticipate that the perspective is the one of the academic. Why not? The academic, considering that, I represent the School of Management. So the perspective is the one of management. So I do not have any scientific background, so for sure I'm skipping the clinical component. So the first KPI is related to the timing, basically. So having in mind the why is we said that the HTA-R is intended to harmonize the assessment and reduce days in patient access. So the first KPI that came to my mind was the timing. So I'm trying to measure the average time from dossier submission to HTA decision. And the dream would be also to compare these also to local level, in the sense that between the HTA supranational decision, there are so many steps that have to take in place at local level. Local means at country level. That would be interesting also to see if something is changing in that area. Then another KPI. The second one is probably equally relevant as the third one. Starting again from the why, the idea is of HTA-R is to standardize, or it's better to harmonize the assessment, but again, national and reimbursement is there, in the sense that, as we all know, the decisions about how to allocate budgets is left to the members. So a KPI could be the one of checking the consistency and harmonization across member states, being aware that we have in Europe, in the European Union, so different healthcare systems, some with universal coverage and others insurance-based, as was anticipated before during other presentations. So it could be interesting to look at the percentage of medical devices that have an aligned HTA outcome across the different member states. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the third one is related to something that I was mentioning about the role of the real-world data in HTA decisions, if they are embedded or not. And this is linked to the idea of integrating MDR with HTA-R. And the last point is the one of the stakeholder engagement, transparency and accountability, in the sense that it's important to measure, and this is probably can be very much operationalized, because behind this there is more than one KPI. So it's not enough to look at how many stakeholders are engaged, so not only who, how many, but also how they are engaged. So, for instance, you were mentioning before that you would like to be engaged in certain steps of the decision making. So it's important also to measure the how.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruben. Yeah. I'm Ruben Casado, I'm cardiologist working in Brussels, but we would like to do as interactive as possible. So it's not only one person, it's many persons, and the level of this room is so high that I'm sure there are a lot of questions on the floor. Only one thing that I think that is very important. What about what you say, that all countries, most of the countries should have the same philosophy, the same way of working, and also reduce the time? How we can do that? Yeah, what is your vision about it?
Okay. Not an easy question in the sense it's not easy to say how to reduce the timing. Let me say that the different countries, based on my observation, are starting a process of efficiency. Professor Marchetti was mentioning Agenas, that is integrating, is trying to anticipate the impact of HTAR. So we have to be ready. Actually, mainly focused on pharma, on pharmaceuticals. We did a survey within the Pharmaceutical Observatory that we have within Zabocconi. And the aim of this survey was intended to try to understand the perspective of different stakeholders at national level towards the HTAR. So if they truly perceive this as an opportunity, and they do, but also they concern, and the main concern is about the timing and the duplication of decisions. So, I mean, above all in countries like Italy and Spain, where there are different levels of government, the risk of duplicating the clinical assessment is very high, more than at national level, in my opinion, at local/regional level. So we need to find a way to avoid this type of approach. I don't know if I answered to your...
Totally agree, and that's why we see a lot of duplicity, a risk of expenditure when we have really to think about it now in this period. And I think that perhaps we can continue with the patient perspective, because it's very important for us to have a patient perspective. Valentina, grazie mille.
Welcome. So yeah, I had mentioned earlier my 4 indicators. It started with the patient involvement in joint scientific consultations and JCA. So we are aware of the complexity and the time constraints with JCA. I thought it would be really valuable to stress also the value of involvement in the joint scientific consultations, because at that stage we may bring a more robust input from the patient perspective without the constraints of the timelines of a JCA. And I see also, that's something we keep reminding, the early patient involvement can really make a major difference later in the process. And so even eventually, no patient involvement in the JCA, but with a very robust involvement in JSC can still bring some positive results from a patient perspective. Then what I think I mentioned also, yeah, what we need is a level of transparency in the process. So even when it comes to joint scientific consultations, if and where possible, try to make some information available, so for patients also to make their own considerations about the process. What we see often is that there is no transparency of patient involvement, and therefore the patient community is not able to assess whether their contribution made a difference. So we need to make sure that even their involvement is monitored and somehow have a tracking of the impact they make, whether it's a JSC or a JCA. So maybe some confidential conversations between patient organizations that were involved and the coordination group might be a way to proceed. Then I also mentioned acceptance of decision outcomes. Here I would like to share also, when we talk about acceptance, it's not just depending on a positive result. So not necessarily a positive outcome means acceptance. Patients may accept even a negative result if there is enough data to support a decision. So what we really want to stress is the need for robust evidence generation to support the decision making. And what we have witnessed in the past is that not always there was enough evidence generation to support decisions, and patients that were maybe complaining for not getting a specific perspective on board, maybe considering other views, making sure that all elements were taken into account. That's why we also very much stress the need for looking at quality of life indicators, because really it's what matters to patients, sometimes even more than the health status itself. So we really need to make sure that these indicators are on board. Then I think I want to go next to the transparency of data. I mean, that's somehow something I have shared earlier. Of course, this also relates a bit also to the availability of plain language material, either even before the JCA or afterwards when it comes to the summary report, because patients may not be able to understand a full report or a full dossier. If this can be simplified and shared in EAA language, it would be very helpful for patients, because they can become the ambassadors even of the HTA regulation if they get the right information in accessible language. And the last one was about alignment. I mean, also Monica mentioned it. I think it relates to everyone. From a patient perspective, it's all about access and timely access to the relevant technologies. So that's why it's important to us.
I have a question or a comment from the floor.
Yeah.
Jürgen?
With regard to EU HTA, I'm always struggling with the word decision. And I want to get your understanding, because strictly speaking, in my understanding, EU HTA does not do any decision. I don't want to downgrade what they are doing, but basically I understand they are producing tables. This may be a little bit too superficial, but basically what I mean is they collect and systemize the evidence, and then decisions are done on the national level. And therefore, I want to know, what do you mean when you talk here about acceptance of decision outcomes, whether this really is related to these tables and reports which are produced by the HTA rapporteurs, or do you basically mean the national agencies? And then I wonder how you relate the acceptance when we talk about EU HTA to the national decisions.
So a good point. I mean, maybe here I simplified too much, but the point was about acceptance of these reports at the EU HTA level. But of course, it can relate to the national level equally.
Okay, so here you basically meant the reports.
Yes.
Okay.
So
acceptance, what does acceptance for you mean? I mean, there is a table which shows a non-statistically trend in OS or quality of life or whatever. What does acceptance mean in this? So there are 10 tables, and 5 of these 10 show some modest efficacy, some show only a non-statistically trend. What does
it can relate to the methods that were used, to having gathered enough evidence, having considered the right patient profiles, having involved the right patient experts, for example, or the relevant clinicians. We can consider the process itself, acceptance of the process.
Monte, you wanted.
Yeah. I have a question on the methodology, whether the performance we want to measure is based on our own expectation, or whether the performance we want to measure is based on the objectives set by the law, and to see whether the law achieved the objective they set, or whether the process achieved our expectation. I think both are acceptable. We just need to align and agree on which one we want to consider.
So basically, what would be the objective of the measurements here, which is the target we are looking for? Yep. Didn't miss anybody?
If Valentina, if I can ask one question.
I mean, my understanding is that this is a work in progress from a legal point of view. So at the moment, probably right now, we are sharing our own views. that at some point will crystallize into a legal aspect to be considered. So at some point it will be a legislation, of course. But we are not there yet, I think.
It is not specific to you, it's
Yes,
everybody. The point is, for example, the introduction of the law, they specify that one of the two objectives is to smooth the single EU market for medicinal product. And is it something we want to measure? Is it part of the performance indicator, or we want to be more pragmatic and focus on what we believe is important from the perspective of clinician that this law should achieve, which may not necessarily be part of the objective set in the law? That's the point.
Yeah, I think that's it's a difficult question to answer. I think from every country, and that's part of the positive thing about Europe. You have 27 different countries. That's a positive thing, but there's no harmonization on how the healthcare in each country is organized. It's everybody has access. That's a good thing compared to the US. A lot of people are not insured, but every country will decide how much money they will spend on a certain medication. There's a big discussion in the Netherlands about, we had the shortage of anti-conception pills just 5 years ago because they charged too little. And in Germany they were available. So these political decisions it would be nice that it would be European-wide, but that's still the European Council. They decide. All our government leaders they decide on this, I think. But that's a political question. On the other side, you have the scientific. I think on the scientific basis, we can have a pan-European opinion of I would involve the scientific organizations like the European Society for Cardiology, the European Federation of Orthopedics, the European Society for Neurology, etc. These umbrella organizations based on science, essentially, they can decide, okay, what do we expect from a scientific point of view? What kind of KPI is important? In orthopedics, that's simple. Worldwide, it's agreed that loosening revision, this re-surgery, is a KPI. That means when you need second surgery, then you can, of course, have the discussion, is an indication for surgery? But loosening and revision surgery is a KPI for bad or good implants. But on a government level, they may say, we don't care. We do not want that people implant disc prostheses, intervertebral disc prostheses. In the Netherlands, the government doesn't allow this. In Germany, you can have it. Is that a bad decision, a good decision? That has to do with money, of course. So I think these things are different. You have a scientific opinion on KPIs, which will be organic and dynamic. That may be different in 2025 and different in 2027. And you have also the political decision on KPIs, which also will differ when the government changes after elections, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think that's currently set with regards to what do we do on a European level. And as Jürgen already alluded to, we are basically producing tables with more or less patient-relevant outcomes and as a basis for decision-making in the respective countries. And if I take what you just discussed and try to convert that into a figure to a monitor, I would simply say it's about the number of PICOs we develop. Yeah, are we going into these procedures with 27, or would we end up with 3? And that is a modest target, admittedly, but frankly, I don't see what else with regard to that specific point, we can achieve to align European countries. It's a simple measure, admittedly, but frankly, I don't see what else could we get. But anybody else with regard to Maurizio?
But I'm coming back to the slide presented by Monica, where showing when, what, where. I would add also why. So it is a trivial consideration, but why meaning once we have measures, KPIs, which is the use then we can do from that evidence, those data. So what I mean is any kind of measure, a KPI, should be included in a specific framework of evaluation leading to potential amendment or change in the processes. So it has to be structured, which is the purpose of the measures, where those measures will be adopted and taken in consideration.
So my question is, seeing the suggested measures here, when should this actually take place? Because from manufacturer viewpoint, I can understand, okay, they want to do this right from the beginning, yeah? I mean, with the CE mark, with the certification, with the market access, this HTA question is probably cleared. But then we want to see post-market data. So that is not possible to have post-market data at that point of time. And then I also understand I guess it's in the interest of everybody that we do not create even more reports, that we maybe use what we have. And as a notified body, we, especially when we look at the high-risk devices, once the device is certified, we will receive from the manufacturer regularly post-market safety update report, annually. Or PFs, like a post-market performance follow-up, from IVD. So the manufacturer will report us, has to report us annually on the performance of the device in the market, So this could be, I think, in my view, very useful to take into consideration. But this is, of course, after certification has taken place, And so these reports have to be provided. And maybe they could be used then in such an evaluation.
But that's observational, I guess, and hence needs a different approach with regard to data, isn't it?
Maybe if I may say something. So yes, the HTA, the GCA will be a review of the available data at the time of GCA is done. So we may end up with tables saying there is no data for this PICO, there is not enough data for another one, and for the other 20 PICOs that we would like to look at, there is not even one single patient who have been, well, I don't know, I mean, that would be a nightmare, but okay. So what I really believe is about post-marketing and continuous, continuous assessment of our devices. And yes, we have the post-marketing follow-up, which is asked by MDR, but we can do a step further, and based on claims data, we can do a lot of comparative assessment nowadays with different methods. I'm not a methodologist, so I think there is a lot of research around that, and it's complex to explain. I'm not able yet to do that. I'm working on it, to be honest. But I think we need to work on that, because especially for medical device, that will be the key. You won't have what's expected at time of GCA. So the GCA will be useful to see the gap, basically, the gap of what's needed, and then we can work on that and develop the evidence, and maybe that will be through a specific CT, but not a complex one, or maybe it will be through different, longitudinal follow-up with individual patient data availability and stuff like that. And I know that in Sweden, for example, they are able to do very interesting things around that, and that we need to really aim for that. And again, representativity is important. So maybe not exhaustive registry, because to follow all patients in France for 10 years, we try to do that. It's not possible. But representativity in different type of settings by different type of expertise might be also interesting. So I think we need to open our mind about the different methods that exist today. And the GCA can be with all this table, an assessment of where the gaps are and how we can fulfill that gaps for the patient as well as for the payers.
So very, very interesting. Assessment will be like a more dynamic assessment for disruptive technology. Also, what we look now that we are going to have more and more artificial intelligence solutions that will need more dynamic assessment, also preserving the the safety of patients. Do you see that it will be possible, really? Because we see that there are coming a lot of solutions in the field, and we are a bit afraid, everybody, mostly the clinicians also, for our patients. How do you see that?
For me, it's possible to do a lot with claims data and with electronic health record today, but it's still a fantasy how to access this data. This data can be the Moira, you know, if you look at Le Seigneur des Anneaux, you say that in English, the Lord of the Rings, where you have a Moira where it's a mess, you know, and data, patient data can be a mess. And with all the artificial intelligence, machine learning, data scientist organization, the regulation with the European health data space, I am hoping that in a few years, because the research is going very fast, in this we will be able to do this type of things. For the time being, it's maybe a fantasy, but I hope before my retirement, and I'm not that young, you know, I can see that, really.
But I think, actually, that's already happening. At least for me, it's a no-brainer, even when I was a resident. The orthopedic registries. And of course, Sweetheart is a good example, but they only do, of course, selected cases. And then the long term, in orthopedics, we've seen 5 years short, 10 years, then we are happy with a good implant. So that's a different ballgame. But I think the registries, I think all class 3 and 2B should be in a registry. I mean, you should avoid extra bureaucracy. But with these scannable forms, so the form I implemented 20 years ago, first you had to fill it in by heart, you had to type the article number in, it took about 6-7 minutes. And my colleague said, Rob, that's too much time and we get only €5. Then I explained them, a secretary can do that in 5 minutes. And that's times 15, they say €50 an hour. That's what she doesn't earn, is it? And now everything is scannable. It's scannable. So in 1 minute, the form is into the registry. I mean, that's already around. That's not fantasy. That happens in the UK, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Germany also. But I think have 60-70% completeness. But that has to do with the lender. Again, politics comes in. So politics is the bad thing. We all know this. But just show them the effect. I think always when you make clinicians do things, and for any citizen, any human being on this planet, what's in it for me will be the question. So what we do with the Netherlands, with the registry, they get every year feedback where they are they in the 1% highest revision rates. And that's the transparency for the patients. The patients, the report you can log up. This time you won't log to the Dutch arthroplasty registry, and you as patients, even as a non-Dutch patient, you can log in and see what the results are. And that's the transparency. But that's perhaps we only have 18 million Dutch people. That's easy. But that exists, and that's easy.
It exists in smaller countries for bigger ones.
The UK is bigger than France. And the UK and France, the complaint of the orthopedic registry in France is 2.2%.
Yeah, it's not working, but you can do a lot with the claims data, because in France the claims data are clear about, you know, redo research, etc. But anyway,
that's not transparent.
No.
In the Scandinavian countries, the Dutch, New Zealand, and you can look any patient. You can also log in Dutch arthroplasty registry, and you see all the data. And that, again, it is possible. There should be a will to do it. But then you should give them the people who put data in, give them something.
Yeah.
Give them something out. And that's the trick. What's in it for me?
I'll be back to all of you, because I recall you were not able to present your ideas on the KPIs. I will be there in a second, but I have a question over here.
Yeah, it was sort of a question and a comment combined. I think the key thing is my observation of the conversation is we're talking about the JCA as the end game here, which kind of is a bit unfortunate, because the whole point of the JCA is to inform something. Otherwise, why are we doing it? I have the split personality. I also support our pharmaceutical business as well as medtech. And on the pharmaceutical side, we're talking about speed to decision making. And there's a clear decision in the pharma side. It's around pricing and access, because you go through that hurdle every time in pretty much every one of the 27 member states. The point we've not really discussed here today is the why. What we're discussing is the how, and a lot of the KPIs, apologies for commenting, but we're talking about measuring the how rather than, and the how is dependent on the question you're asking, you know, the why. And it's actually positive to hear your comments, Rob, around actually what patients are after is that ongoing validation of outcomes and that iterative review. We're not going to get that from a JCA done on the same evidence as the CE marking at the time of launch. You know, it's just, and so is that the right JCA to be doing? Should it be some sort of iterative piece? I'm a bit concerned we're up against the clock with the regulation, and there's a tick box to be done, and we may get that sort of JCA at the time of launch because it clears the regulation, rather than actually delivering something which is supporting continuous evidence generation down the line, which actually will add value to patients in a systematic way around, you know, supporting ongoing evidence generation.
Which would not only imply evidence generation, but ongoing and continuous assessment, basically. Yes, yes, exactly. So I'm not sure, Andreas, whether you were already with your ideas. You was. Okay, then Rob.
I think I have one provocative slide, but you have a point. That's the whole thing. The thing also happened with the MDR. It's not mandatory to have prompts for 2, 3, 4 years. It's totally nonsense. Because when I have pain in my knee, after a year, I may have pain in my back. And for the patient, it's very difficult to say, do I have pain in my knee? Or is it pain from the back pain or the shoulder pain? I mean, also from a scientific point of view, but I just said, yes, you have to do it, industry, just to have the regulations down the road. And that's a danger. It means politicians mean well, but they need some scientific input.
That's mine.
Oh, yeah.
Help you.
Oh, that's a good thing. Yeah, I just had one provocative thing. So what would be good from the expert panel perspective, what I still see is a struggle. When I was president of the Dutch Orthopedic Association, we had a meeting with the Inspector General, and we always invite a person. Just an anecdote is this. And we had an astronaut. André Kuipers was a Dutch astronaut to open the annual meeting. And I invited Robbie van Dinscoat, and she was the Inspector General. And said, well, she's the enemy. She's the enemy of... I say, no, we have to collaborate with her. And her lecture was on trust. And I was then the president. I said, also, trust. We need trust. It's not about... They are the bad guys, the industry is the bad guys, and I'm the science man, I'm on the good side. No, the connection is really important. So what I put down here is it trust? Yeah, trust or uncertainty. I think it's about uncertainty. I think we should have more trust in all the different stakeholders. That's my point. Also, when I'm in Brussels, I tell them, perhaps I'm a naive academic, I don't know, but I think, and there's a struggle from industry, notified bodies, but also the regulators on uncertainty, even for me as a researcher. And then people abuse the p-value. I mean, a trend 2 means that doesn't exist. It's a trend means a trend to becoming pregnant for a woman. Well, you're either pregnant or not pregnant. For men, so the trend doesn't exist either. It's nonsense. Is there a likelihood that it's less than 1 in 20? Okay, anyway, I'm not going to lecture. So what we need is clinical relevance. That's important, of course, for me as a clinician. And that's something we discuss in the core MD. It's not valid yet. Just to help. It's a framework, but a framework doesn't mean that this is the holy grail. A framework is just to help things. So I'm against rigid frameworks, but that's something we discussed with epidemiologists in my department, also with people in Geneva, and that just to help the industry and notified bodies how to go forward. To me, the biggest challenge we have is how to deal with this uncertainty. I fully understand the regulators, because when there is a metal disaster or leaking breast implants, well, that's really bad for them, because every citizen goes to the regulator. You approve this, but that happens. When that same patient steps on a bicycle in Leiden, that's very dangerous to use a bicycle in the Netherlands. Everybody uses bicycles, but then you are aware. So I don't know how to deal with this, but I think we should collaborate and just give a simple framework. That would be, for me, when we have this, accept this, and not the 95 pages document which is now out. It's now open for consultation in the MDCG. 95 pages, can you imagine? I also gave some comments, but okay, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Rob. I have a couple of questions in the back first. Oriol, I guess you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. So when I look at most of the KPIs you've been proposing, I would certainly agree on the why, but I would be more interested in the what for. So, of course, when, but what for? And then given that JCA is kind of, yeah, it's no one's land because it's everyone's land, but also no one's land. So focusing too much on the process does not lead us anywhere. So I think the effort should be on trying to find outcomes that are applicable to all, whatever process is done, so that we can measure the result of what we're doing in a stable way, because most of the KPIs you've been proposing will change with time, and therefore no database will stand. So, that's a bit of a comment / criticism. And then the second one, the second point I wanted to make is, well, I think I've been hearing that there should be conditional KPIs. So KPIs that could be approved or validated with time. And my question would be, why should we allow devices to go along with that, whereas drugs don't? Do we mean that they're less important or that they're less critical?
Jörg, you wanted to comment as well? Or?
Yes, not directly now to what Oriol said. My point, Rob, to your slide is in how many of your expert panel reviews that you did, so estimate, did you have a RCT, did you have an observational study, did you have a case control study? What is the current standard? Could you give us an insight here?
See, the one I had was mostly observational studies, and when we gave the free advice, I recommended to do twice an RCT, and using
twice out of?
Of the free advices, how many free advices did we give? So that's the pre-submission. So help the industry, what kind of study is ideal? I think 6. But it also depends on what kind of surrogate endpoint you can have. In orthopedics, we are happy with orthopedics. Cardiology is simple, it's death. But I'll also have this discussion with the cardiologist. When you implant your pacemaker, it was fraud, even in the Netherlands, fraud 5 years ago. Cardiologists implanted pacemakers in healthy patients for money. That happened also in the Netherlands. So even death is then a bad endpoint. So in orthopedics we have migration 3D, 0.1 millimeter, and you can do a very simple randomized controlled trial with 2 times 40 patients. That's what I advised. But that all depends when you have an orphanage device like a spinal implant we just evaluated. That's done in less than 0.01% of the European population. So it's an orphanage device. Then you can never do a randomized controlled trial. But you should do you should do an observational study, and the PMCF data will be feed back into the system. So this iterative, dynamic thing that's essential in orthopedics. So a 1 point KPI is, I think, for an implant is not a good thing, because that implant stays in the body. That's my personal opinion. So this iterative change, what you are talking about, that's the reason we need registries.
If I can say something, due to the fact that you spoke about cardiologists, that is important what you said, the trust. But it's not only a trust between patients and clinicians. I think it's a trust between patients, clinicians, European Union, developers, disruptive technology, notified bodies, how we can go for that to improve the trust. What is your idea with your experience?
I think, again, what the scientist was talking about, I think the fact that we have MDR and that the expert panels, that these clinicians are involved. I mean, I'm not saying that we are the best persons, but I think the fact we speak, that makes it also pragmatic. And again, any doctor will be risk-based. He will never, you always, also when you prescribe a pill. With implants, the difficulty is when you have a hip, a hospital has a certain hip system. The reason is because when you have a new hip, although you did 2,000 hips and you have a new hip system, there is evidence, research, then you have a higher revision rate. There's some very QSUM analysis. We did also in Leiden, and also in Scotland. So that hip implant will be there for 5 years, and then you have a European tender. A surgeon does today the Exeter hip, and tomorrow a different hip, and the day after another hip, he will have bad results. So that's different with medication. I can describe now medication X, and a minute later Y and Z. And I do not know what happens within the patient. Of course, the internal medicine or cardiologist and has thought about what the impact will be. So with devices, the more use of the same device, the results were better for the patients. That's the difficulty. That's the reason I put it down usability. And the operator, has a huge impact on the implant, which is being implanted. You need to analyze both.
Of course. Transparency, as you said before. I don't know if there is any other question on the floor, comment?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the point about patient-reported outcomes. The idea is to find a way to gather a patient perspective in absence of any other type of involvement, direct involvement. And we have to also take into account it has to be an iterative process because the experience of patients evolve. And even if we think that their standard of care will evolve over time, and it's also their unmet needs will evolve and will change. So we cannot escape from this idea of iteration. You cannot just take a picture one day and then use it for the next following 20 years. You need to redo it once in a while. Yeah. And so we have to live with this idea of iterations and continuous data collection.
Yeah. Well, just I'm fully a believer in prompts, but don't misunderstand me. But I think after 2 years, that's difficult from a scientific basis, because we are one human being. We're not a knee or a shoulder. That's one human being standing for. When you do prompts, at least, I don't want to be arrogant. When you have back pain and you do back pain surgery. I had back pain just for the first time in my life 3 months ago. I wanted to get rid of that pain, but there's no need to do surgery because we know after 1 year this will be worse. So when you do then in the private clinics, they want to do the prompts. Of course they're happy, but they stopped measuring at 6 months and 1 year. Then you get garbage in, garbage out. There's also how to manipulate data. That's the only thing I'm going to say.
Another point.
I know.
Yeah, and another advice would be also to get on board the patient community to help with the co-design, because of course the individual patients with no previous experience of living with back pain, maybe that doesn't have the long-term overview of the process, but the patient community gathers patient experts who do know what will happen from now to 5, 10 years, and they can share maybe what are implications in a longer term.
One fast question, Valentina. Before you spoke about the heterogeneity of patients, the difficulty to have a general, homogeneous vision of patients. What is your opinion about it? How the clinicians can have access to an homogeneous vision, or regulators or companies, because it's so complicated. What is better, to educate patients to be experts, patients? To have a lot of patients that will give a more or less a vision, or selected group of patients? How do you see it? Because you have...
It's very complicated.
That's why I asked you, of course.
It's very complicated. So my personal view is I wouldn't just go for very expert patients, because they tend, in my view, they tend to also lose that genuine perspective. And they may maybe give for granted elements that to an individual patient are relevant, because they get into more technical aspects rather than really considering how you cope with your condition, which is the basic question we need to ask. It's important to have enough understanding, but without losing the contact with the ground population, with the relevant people that are part of that community. You need to find a balance.
Thank you. Any other question there? Yeah. please.
I believe the question is either to have patients becoming HTA expert or to have the HTA Commission members becoming expert in listening to patients.
Or becoming patients themselves. No, yeah, actually, I'm aware of the fact, Frédérique, that you were not able to show us and elaborate on your KPI perspective, but I think Ruben wanted to bring in another perspective. Is that correct?
Yes, we go now to countries, member states perspective, no? Now perhaps Maya or Marco, they want to comment something regarding this issue. How do you see key performance indicators from national perspective, member state, very shortly?
I can comment, but no, I can comment about from the national perspective. So I mean, from Italy. So I can bring this comment, not from the other member state. But we are aligned also in this. So the expectation is to reduce the effort and to speed up the process. So I mean, it means that we are not going to do 100% of evaluation because we are going to share the effort. We were agree about how to do this. So we work for 2 years and a half. So this is the added value. So it means that all of us are preparing to transfer this JCA into not only for medical devices, but also for pharmaceutical product into the national process. I saw many comments respect to the pricing, but we need to keep in mind that pricing and reimbursement is connected with the financial of the member state. Now we are talking about what we are going to evaluate as benefit for patient, that is producing really a benefit for patient. So how we can evaluate in the same way. I mean, in the past we had some example in which we have some, there is a very interesting paper published a few years ago. It's on a medicinal product. The same product in different countries has been evaluated innovative in one country as not innovative in another country. So it means that there is something wrong at the time in the way in which this evaluation process were performed. Now, we are able to use the same reference point, but by the way, we are going to evaluate this product together. So the relative effectiveness together. Then pricing is connected with is a next step. So, but for sure have an impact on the pricing and reimbursement. This is also probably the explanation because we have a co-legislation now, because HTA evaluation is very close to the price and reimbursement process in national member state. And member state wanted to have the leadership in this. So, and this is, reasonable to understand. I was not there, but this is my interpretation. But by the way, actually we have a curve that we were able to build in 2 years and a half, and not in 2 years and a half, in 20 years, because I was mentioning before the cultural change. So what I expect now is that we are going to really, this is my expectation, the feeling that I have living inside of this process. And then in the next years, we are going to have an increasing willingness to, to use and to do more, I don't say GCA, but more things together. So, and also, I mentioned procurement before, I mentioned also, we have, a scenario this is opening now.
Thank you. Yeah, please, Monica.
I wanted just to integrate complement what Professor Marchetti is saying, which is very consistent with some of the interpretation I tried to bring to your attention. So I fully agree that the HTAR at European level is intended to focus on a clinical component, and again, I fully agree that the pricing and reimbursement is a decision that has to be left to the national level, also for budget reasons. What I think could be interesting is to observe if the implementation of the HTAR and the information that the joint clinical assessment does brings to some changes in the differences across countries in terms of more than pricing, reimbursement. I mean, now we have differences about reimbursement. It's interesting to see if using the same, let's say, starting point, which is the outcome of the JCA, brings to more harmonization also in terms of reimbursement or not. I'm not saying that this is the aim. I'm saying that it could be interesting to observe this, being aware that, of course, the two dynamics are different, have to be kept like this also for because we have so many different, types of healthcare systems. If we compare France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. This was just.
Thanks. Frédérique is waiting for a long time by now, and she hasn't had the opportunity to present her ideas. Let me start that with a question. We got the comment by Oriol why there should be different standards if you look into medical devices and drugs. I'm not saying you should start with the answer on that, but perhaps you can cover that at the end.
Yeah. Well, maybe I start with that, because we are not the same. Drugs are not medical devices, and medical devices, inside medical devices, there is a huge heterogeneity. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I'm not sure the standard for drugs is always applicable. For example, there is for orphan drugs, etc., where you adapt the way the framework of assessment as well, so there is some adaptation. And I think the long-term follow-up for drugs is also important, which we have been talking about, iterative review, etc., because you may have adverse events after 5, 7, 10 years, which are important to follow, and we have seen that as well. So that's why I think standards must be different, because we are not assessing the same object. So, and the same intervention. So point blank, for me, that's even a no-brainer. Now about discussion around GCA, national HTA, and pricing and reimbursement. What I had in mind in my slide, and that I finish with that is, and it was the title, if I remember well, we do all that to accelerate patient access to high quality medicine, medical technology, whatever they are. And that's the primary objective. And patient access for me is, the end is pricing and reimbursement. I'm sorry to say that, but if you want equity in Europe, you need to have some sort of access for the patient. So that's why I think one of the KPI should, maybe we won't be able to assess that in the next 5 years, but should be that as well. Is really to ensure that at the end of the day, patients have access to the best quality intervention we can have. When I say intervention, it's because I put in the same, basket all the health products we may have, or vaccine or whatever. So that's really, I think that's why the time to value or time to access is really the entire time. Then you can go in the middle and say, okay, my first KPI will be the implementing act, because I am an HTD and I need to ensure that it's adapted to my product and that I can work with this regulation. The second one is the relevance of GCA per se, so number of PICO, stuff like that. The third one is the usefulness for the national HTA body. And the last one is how will the government take care, based on the GCA and national HTA, how will they decide? And I know HTA is one of the criteria to decide to fund a product or not, but I think it's one of the most important, and it's a basis nearly everywhere for drugs. It's not for medical devices. So that's a question. So yeah, so that's how I build my KPIs in these 4 steps. And yeah. you should, framework should not be, square and try to have an elephant climbing a tree is not working.
Thank you. I'm sure there are some questions. Please, Maya.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really great to hear this because I should have said at the end of my presentation that in the legislation we have to do a review. And the review is for January 2028, which is basically around the corner. So my question then to you is that many of these, as you said, they'd be very good in the long term, but we need to also find something in the review that can also show the veracity of this new framework and the system. And I'm very glad that Professor Rob mentioned trust, because I would say, and I think Marco, you'll agree with me, but also Valentina and the others who are involved in this process, the last 2.5 years have been about trust building, because we wouldn't be where we are now if we weren't already working together, trusting that each has our own role. So what's a KPI for trust? How do you measure trust? Because that would be great, because I think that's what gets me up in the morning and doing all these meetings, is that I have counterparts who all want this to work, who are all working really hard on what they're trying to do. And to the point by Frédérique, I think I agree with you that the ultimate aim is the access. And one of the reasons, not probably more for the medicines, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, is that's why we're starting so early with the joint clinical assessment for medicines, because in most countries it does not start at the time of the marketing authorization. And so this is key, and for me this would be a big measure of success if the actual HTA is done quicker, the national HTA, because we are handing over a ready-made clinical package. So that part of the work is being done by experts, sharing the burden across Europe, and then each country does their own. And what you were mentioning about the slide about how HTA is done differently, I was in Spain a few months ago, where Spain has launched a big public, a decree, adapting the HTA, their HTA process, trying to make all of the regions work, there's more coordination. So I think, again, this regulation is also spurring on more kind of coherence, coordination. And I would also say in that regard, I hope it will also spur on more data management, more data science. As I say now to any young person, please go into data science, because that's where it's all about data. And thank you for mentioning European Health Data Space. I know we all have very high expectations, so I will tell my friends on the other side of the corridor that you're all waiting for the EHDS so that we can have more data. But I think it's a very important signal for everyone to recognize the importance of data, and some of the things you said about this, I hope very much that this regulation will spur that on, that you can create better data, we can identify more studies, that there is a level of, there's a level of quality. And I should say that this regulation is based on 3 fundamental principles. The first one being high quality. It's not about going to the lowest denominator, it's about bringing everyone up to have high quality.
Thank you, Maya. This sounds to me still, we are basically looking into the performance of a procedure. And then the next question actually is, do we need different performance measurements when talking about medical devices or drugs or medicinal products? Yeah, since the procedure applied is the same, then I would assume you can use the same performance measures. And with regard to your other point, is it really what we want to achieve, to complete the assessment quicker or to have those products quicker to patients? That would be basically the question. And then, of course, it is about what's the limitation of the current approach. And Marco elaborated on that already with regard to pricing, reimbursement. You even included purchasing and stuff like that. So having that said, Monte, you wanted to comment as well.
I have a question for Maya. Could the proportion of product which file for GCA be a KPI? And what is the consequence of making a decision not to file for GCA?
Thank you. So are you talking about the medical devices? Okay, so pharmaceuticals, there's no choice, there's no file. So it's a staggered approach. So it's all currently now between from 2025 to the end of 2027, all new oncology medicines will have to go through JCA. So there's no choice. So it's not up to the industry to decide to ask to have a JCA.
If you don't file, what happens?
I'm sorry?
If a company decides not to file, what happens?
Then we go to legal service because it's. I mean, this is as I said, this is about the trust building. So there are companies, and we work closely with the industry to understand how this has come about, the reasons for it. So we will have to see. I mean, this is part of an EU legislation. When you don't follow the EU legislation, I guess there will be a discussion about what the plans are. There's no penalty as such put into the legislation, and it's also a free service. So it's not being paid. You don't have to pay. The industry doesn't pay for any of this. They don't have to pay for the joint scientific consultation. They don't pay for the joint clinical assessment.
I don't see anywhere any obligation in the regulation. When I read it, I never see you must, you have to. I see it more you could, or it's not constraining. I read it several times trying to find somewhere where it is a constraint. It's never written as a constraint from what I read.
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer. I have no legal background.
In the implementing regulations, there are obligations put on the industry to fulfill certain conditions. And the same as there are obligations on all of the different actors as well.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Andreas. I'm working with Roche. I think to conclude that we have a positive outcome of an HTA, we need to conclude that on two dimensions. One is that the intervention improves standard of care. I think we've heard this today quite a bit. But then there's a second dimension, and that is with what probability we can conclude that. What I get from the discussion is a little bit probably the outcome of JCA will be that in most cases we won't have the certainty to conclude anything. And so I think we can make this maybe a shared KPI of any stakeholder participating in the process, that we increase the certainty of the assessment, of the outcome of the assessment, so that this is not only on industry, but it's also on those who conduct the HTA to help us as one to increase the certainty of the outcome of the assessment. Because it can be still with the industrial person or the entity to say, yes, the intervention does not improve standard of care. That's their risk. But I think we all together can improve the probability of that assessment, so that maybe we can, to your earlier point, Mr. Fricke, that we can come from 27 PICOs to maybe 3 or 2, because if you have 2 or 3 PICOs, then the industry can maybe help serve that conclusion with running 2 or 3 studies or evidence programs that are specifically designed to serve that. So I want to put this forward maybe as an idea for KPI.
Thank you. Oriol, you?
No, it's a minor comment. Sorry, insisting on something I touched upon before. So, and maybe Monica, coming from business, you can help us here. So, there's an objective in the law, which is improve access, improve quality, and sustainability. Why don't we have the KPIs linked to these 3 objectives? It should be relatively simple.
Yeah, and it would not differ between medical devices and drugs simply. But I jotted down already, we would have what is called a weight indicator, not only for drugs, but for medical devices as well. That would be something. Having an overview, a profile of countries and their waiting times, that's one. And the number of picos would indicate convergence as well. Sorry for that.
I have a question about notified bodies. So if I remember well, we have in Europe today 49 notified bodies. Is a variability in their performance? And if so, this variability may influence the definition of the KPIs and the performance indicators we are talking today. And if so, we need some measures to standardize more, making more homogeneous the performance.
Yes, we have 50 notified bodies under MDR and 10 or 11 under IVDR. And yes, under the directives, MDD and IVDD before, there was a huge variability between notified bodies. And the MDR tackled this by including commission representatives in the assessment, also in the renewal assessments, and also by having not only the national authority auditing their own national notified body, but having joint audits. So when we got notified in the very beginning, we had 3 or 4 member states, in addition to the German authority on site, plus 2 representatives from the Commission, which should somewhat establish a more level playing field. In reality, I think we are not yet there. There is still quite a variability between notified bodies, also given the different sizes. I mean, we are very large. There are others which are very small. And I mean, the level of expertise you can have in these notified bodies is then somewhat different. So yeah, that's the question is, to what extent do you utilize the notified bodies, reports or assessments in your system? This is correct. That's a question we must have. Yeah.
Thanks. One quick question, a critical one, but you see, having been through many assessments in Germany with IQWiG on medicinal products, I always suggested to IQWiG, the German HTA body, to do early advices, to do an early advice on, let's say, study design. When is RCT possible? Also with, not just with medical devices, also with...
Answer is easy from IQWiG.
No. Exactly. Yeah. But they said they don't do early advices for one reason, because it's co-creation. It's becoming your own baby. Now, what you described earlier on, that usually a manufacturer doesn't switch the notified body and so on, this would fall under the IQWiG definition of co-creation. And I think, let's say also the role of notified bodies, from my point of view, will considerably change if HTA really gets to the ground in this environment. Perhaps you could comment on, let's say, my question probably, how will the role of notified bodies change due to the entry of HTA in this arena?
Let me first comment on the co-creation, because notified bodies are strictly forbidden to give any advice and to give any hint on how, for example, change whatever, or modify, let's say, clinical data to satisfy us. That is not permissible. And also, manufacturers change notified bodies, they do it. The barrier is high because of the labeling. I mean, the cost is just relatively high. And we are supervised by the authorities, and we are also bound to exchange our auditors and our assessors on a regular basis. So it's not that we have the same person going there for for years. So I don't think this will be or is an issue. how the HTA will change our role, this is, I don't know. I think for us, the bigger question is in the moment, how will the revision of the MDR possibly influence our role? Because there are some, so to say, corrections needed to make the process better, and this may also impact how we work. Yeah.
I wanted to comment briefly on Auriel's good idea, of course, to connect key performance indicators on the goals which are defined by the regulation. One thing which I'm always struggling with is if you talk about something like improvement access or making access quicker or something like this, then you basically, we have the problem that we have a single arm trial, because we don't have the other arm where there is no JCA done. And I really don't know how we can model the counterfactual. I'm thinking, well, sometimes I'm thinking pre-post may be an adequate approach, but of course we know so many things are changing during time that pre-post is also not valid. Really, therefore, I don't think that if we get an answer that X% access for X% patients, what do we really see a chance to link this to the introduction of JCA? I'm really skeptical.
Just a very quick answer. I don't think there's a perfect solution to your proposal. I think what you suggest is very fair, but I think that a suboptimal KPI agreed on certain definitions would be much better than having 100 KPIs on processes.
So now, yes, please.
Yeah, so Yves Verboven. So I want to come back on the notified bodies and the expert panels, given that these technologies are going through this process. And my understanding is that there is also then a drive towards moving towards common specifications, to have a consistency in the expectation of what type of evidence need to be generated in the context of the medical device regulation. Just wanted to see if you could elaborate a little bit of what's the idea. If once the technology goes through an expert panel, how is this then moving towards a consistency in a common specification for the next technology, the competitors? So any developments on common specifications?
Actually, yesterday I gave a talk in London on this. I was still in Leiden, just on Zoom. And I think, of course, the common specification, but that Maya knows it better, and Marco, I think, they have to go through the MDCG. So I think in that respect, the scientific umbrella organization I was talking, European Society of Cardiology, European Federation of Orthopedics, etc., they may have a role then in conjunction with the expert panels. The expert panels are already under the umbrella of EMA, DG Santé, so that they're already existing. And then in collaboration, we may define some common specifications for example, I wrote a white paper on the spinal implants, on the non-mobile spinal implants, but that's not a common specification. We just had a white paper endorsed by the European Spine, European Federation of Orthopedics, but it has no legal, it's not a legal entity. But I think that's probably the way forward. Again, trust about the European scientific organizations, trust by the EU regulators, and then that will move forward, I think. So there is some initiative on this, at least from the role I have.
Yeah, common specification make the life for manufacturer and notified body much simpler, yeah, because it's very clear what we are talking about. Yeah, it's written there. There are clear criteria, maybe even for clinical trials, whatever, patient populations and so on and so forth. But the process to get to them is quite long, yeah, and we have not so many, especially for medical devices. I think not many. For IVDs, we have quite a number. But then the expert panel opinion comes in handy for IVDs. It's public. I don't know for medical devices, not, I think. But if there is a published opinion on a certain device, of course, the notified body will look at that when a similar device comes in for assessment. And if, I mean, this is so to say then the benchmark, this is what we then will see as state of the art, yeah? And we will very carefully read what this expert panel has commented on and what advice they gave, and we will certainly ask the manufacturer, hello, why have you looked at this, and do you meet this? And if not, then it will be, we want to hear the answer. So these, if they are published and available, this is very useful, and it's much faster than developing common specifications, which need to go through these long-lasting legal steps.
So the official opinions we give, not the pre-submission, they're not published, but the other ones are just published on the website of the EU. The only downside for us as expert panel, so we put a lot of time in, we never see what the notified body does with our advice. That's the discussion we had. We have a meeting again with all the chairs of the coordinating committee, will be May in Amsterdam. I brought it forward again. It's quite frustrating. We put a lot of effort in, we give an opinion, but we do not know whether TÜV says or BSI says, well, it's a ROP, okay, well, that's down. No, but that's also frustrating. But I'm happy to see that you say you read the reports on the up. Perfect. That's a good thing. I'm happy. I'm happy now.
Valentina, you can take the mic.
Yes.
But I wanted to bring in the two questions or comments from the back.
Yeah, many things. We've discussed multiple times that our performance indicators should measure how successful the system that we create is vis-à-vis the political intent. And the political intent is to improve patient access. We've also heard that multiple times. But that is not what HTA is for. It's not to just grant anything early access. It's to discriminate the good from the bad. And so I think a KPI could also be to what extent we have actually achieved that. And then I'm getting back to my earlier comment on certainty. So what is the level of certainty by which we can conclude an intervention is better than another one? And so that it can ultimately guide clinical decision making and clinical practice so that we can improve patient care.
Shall we take the second comment, Monte, yours as well, and then I take a last round here, starting with Valentina, and then Rob, I saw you were jumping already. So
it was just to respond to Jürgen about single-arm trial. You can do an anchored indirect treatment comparison, which are rejected by GCA methodological guidance, and you can do counterfactual scenario with synthetic data, which will not be receivable by GCA. So that's solution, but they're not accepted.
okay, thank you very much. Very creative. Valentina, please.
Yes, so my point here is that maybe right now, in view of the revision foreseen in 2028, I would focus not on the successfulness of the regulation, on the workability of the regulation, because we will have a chance to improve the system, and we want to review whether the system as it has been conceived works from all stakeholders' point of view. Then I would really invest the capacity right now on monitoring this process and make sure that it's workable for the time being. And then in the longer term, we may assess the successfulness. But I suspect that in 3 years from now, we won't have enough data to monitor and measure successfulness, probably.
I'm not so sure whether the so-called KPIs would not be very similar for monitoring progress as opposed to monitoring success. Not so sure about that.
I was just jumping. I think the first step is, of course, healthcare evaluation. That's one of my hobbies. So is it necessary to do spine surgery? Is it necessary to do a acromioplasty when you have pain in your shoulder? There's several sham trials on this. That's, of course, the first step. Is it really valuable? I don't know if you know, total knee, it's 30,000 times a year in the Netherlands. I think 60 or 70,000 times in Germany. But 20%, research from Leiden, Karolinska in Canada, 20% is not happy, meaning more pain, less walking distance, and it's elective surgery. That's healthcare evaluation. There's a very nice randomized controlled trial, physiotherapy versus total knee in the New England Journal of Medicine, I think 7-8 years ago, by School et al. The total knee was better. But the interesting thing is of that trial, was only, I think, 2 times 89 or 90 patients. The interesting thing is that at 1 year, 40% of the ones with physiotherapy still did not have a knee. And at 5 years, it was still 30%. And then I'm talking about orthopedics. And that's the same goes up, is true for all the different medical specialties. So healthcare evaluation is key, and that should be done before we do the JCA, etc. That's my last remark, sorry.
No, that's fine. The last couple of minutes, I wanted to give the others the opportunity whether they have a final comment. I think with regard to the timekeeper, that's okay. Yeah, okay.
So probably it's more related to the methodology. I mean, I agree. We have to start from the why. That can be widely interpreted because, for instance, based on the understanding I have of the HTAR, the point is not simply the access, is a faster access and then harmonized access. And so probably what we should agree on is what are the whys, and then probably working on the different dimensions or KPIs that we identified, we can clusterize them. But I agree that we have to start from those. I mean, I'm not proposing my whys, but probably we have to start identifying those. And then we can clusterize the different proposals.
Thanks.
Well, I'm just thinking we are working on KPIs to evaluate the European regulation, and I was thinking, okay, but as Medtronic, what is the KPI that will be measuring my teams to achieve successful GCA? And that's another thing. And how can we work out? So, because I think if I remember well, we have 60 days to submit a dossier on because that we don't know before the 60 days. So, this type of thing. So I would go towards Valentina's point of view, which is it workable? Are we able to do it, first and foremost, in the first years, before looking at why do we do all that? Because, well, it's very important, but we won't be able to assess it. And to go back to how to assess GCA, it's how to assess HTA. And before, after, doing, not doing is another story, but you don't do RCT on HTAs, that's for sure.
Last comment from your end, Andreas?
Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. I hope that with the further shaping of this implementation that the work or what manufacturers do together with notified bodies and also what we do with the expert panels, that this can be this can be useful, yeah, because that we don't create even more documents, make things more heavy. I think this would be really good if we can find some synergies there, and that these existing things maybe can be modified or can be used as such. I think this would be very good.
Thank you. And final word goes to Ruben.
Yeah. Any final comment? Yeah. So thank you. I think this is a good example of patients that are the center of our system. But I would remind that after or before everybody will be a patient. Also of clinicians that want the best for their patients. Member states, stakeholders, European Commission that they have the responsibility and the determination to regulate for the best of interests of the patients. Also technology, the industry with disruptive technology that has shown historically that they have the capacity to do. And I know that not all technology does it. That's why we are so happy to have you here, academics for sure, and also notified bodies. So I would like to thank you, and also that this is an example of collaboration, an example of a Europe that advances. Thank you for the invitation and to advance in this direction. Thank you very much. Yep.